Okay, we're rolling. You whacked me in the face.
He's eating foods.
You are eating foods. Okay.
We're having peanut butter pancakes for dinner.
They are having peanut butter pancakes for dinner. Okay, here we go.
Can you smell it?
No, it's a video. No one can smell it. You're a goober. All right, I'm going to read now. Excontinual protocols. Do you guys remember what was happening? Nita just dragged them both through the portal. She lay with her face.
Through the spooky portal.
She lay with her face pressed against the cold, harsh gravel, feeling the grit of it against her cheek, the hot tears as they leaked between her lashes, and that awful chill wind that wouldn't stop tugging at her clothes. Very slowly, Nita opened her eyes, blinked, and gradually realized that the problem with the place where she lay was not her blurred vision. It was just very dim there. She leaned on her skinned hands, pushed herself up, and looked to see where she was. Dark gray gravel was all around. Farther off, something smooth and dark with navy blue bumps. The helipad. Farther still, the railing, and beyond it, the sky. Dark. That was odd. It had been morning. The sound of a moan made Nita turn her head. Kit was close by, lying on his side with his hands over his face. Sitting on his shoulder, looking faint as a spark about to go out, was Fred. Nita sat up straighter, even though it made her head spin. She had fallen a long way. She didn't want to remember how far. "Kit," she whispered. "You okay? Fred?" Kit turned over, pushed himself up on his hands to a sitting position, and groaned again. Fred clung to him. "I don't think I busted anything," Kit said, slow and uncertain. "I hurt all over. Fred, what about you?" "The sun is gone," Fred said, sounding absolutely horrified. Kit looked out across the helipad into the darkness and rubbed his eyes. "Me and my bright ideas. What have I got us into?" "As much my bright idea as yours," Nita said. "If it weren't for me, we wouldn't have been out by that world gate in the first place. Anyway, Kit, where else could we have gone? Those Puritans..." Kit shuddered. "Don't even talk about them. I'd sooner be here than have them get me." He got to his knees, then stood up, swaying a moment. "Whew. Come on, let's see where the world gate went." He headed off across the gravel. Nita got up on her knees too, then caught sight of a bit of glitter lying a few feet away and grabbed at it happily. Her pen! None the worse for wear. She clipped it securely to the pocket of her shirt and went after Kit and Fred. Kit was heading for the south-facing railing. "I guess since you only called for a retrieval, the gate dumped us back on top of the..." His voice trailed off suddenly as he reached the railing. Nita came up beside him and saw why. The city was changed. A shiver ran all through Nita, like the odd feeling that comes with an attack of déjà vu, but this was true memory, not the illusion of it. She recognized the place from her first spell with Kit. The lowering, sullen feeling gloom. The shadowed island held prisoner between its dark, icy rivers. Frowning buildings hunched themselves against the oppressive, slaty sky. Traffic moved, but very little of it, and it did so in the dark. Few headlights or taillights showed anywhere. The usual bright stream of cars and trucks and buses was here only dimly seen motion and a faint sound of snarling engines. And the sky. It wasn't clouded over. It wasn't night. It was empty. Just a featureless grayness, hanging too low like a ceiling. Simply by looking at it, Nita knew that Fred was right. There was no sun behind it, and there were no stars, only this wall of gloom, shutting them in, imprisoning them with the presence Nita remembered from the spell that she could feel faintly even now. It wasn't aware of her, but... She pushed back away from the rail, remembering the Rowan's words. The other, the witherer, the kindler of wildfires. "Kit," she said, whispering, this time doing it to keep from perhaps being overheard by that. "I think we better get out of here." He backed away from the rail too, a step at a time. Well, he said, very low, now we know what your pen was doing in New York City. The sooner it's out of here, the happier I'll be. Kit, where did the World Gate go? He shook his head, came back to stand beside her. Wherever it went, it's not out there now. Nita let out an unhappy breath. Why should it be? Everything else has changed. She looked back at the helipad. The stairwell was still there, but its door had been ripped away and lay buckled on the gravel. The helipad itself had no design painted on it for a helicopter to center on when landing. The glass of the small building by the pad was smashed in some places and filmed all around. The building was full of rubble and trash. A ruin.
Is this some sort of dark world where the dark presence took over?
Where are we? Nita said. The place we saw in the spell, Manhattan. But different. Nita chewed her lip nervously. Is this an alternate world, maybe? The next universe over? The World Gate was just set for a retrieval, but we jumped through. Maybe we messed up its workings. Carl said this one was easy to mess up. I wonder how much trouble you get in for busting a World Gate, Kit muttered. I think we're in enough trouble right now. We have to find the thing. See if you can find me the sun and the stars and the rest of the universe while you're at it, Fred said. He sounded truly miserable, much worse than when he'd swallowed the pen. I don't know how long I can bear this silence. Kit stood silent for a moment, staring out at that grim, cold cityscape. There is a spell we can use to find it that doesn't need anything but words, he said. Good thing, we don't have much in the way of supplies. We'll need your help, though, Fred. Your claudication was connected to the world gates when we went through. You can be used to trace it. Anything to get us out of this place, Fred said. Well, Nita said, let's find a place to get set up. The faint rattling noise of helicopter rotors interrupted her. She looked westward along the long axis of the roof, toward the dark, half-hidden blot that was Central Park, or another version of it. A small flying shape came wheeling around the corner of a skyscraper a few blocks away and cruised steadily toward the roof where they stood, the sharp clatter of its blades ricocheting more and more loudly off the blank dark faces of neighboring skyscrapers. We'd better get under cover, Kit said. Nita started for the stairwell and Kit headed after her, but a bit more slowly. He kept throwing glances over his shoulder at the approaching chopper, both worried by it and interested in it. Nita looked over her shoulder, too, to tell him to hurry, and then realized how close the chopper was, how fast it was coming. A standard two-seat helicopter, wiry skeleton, glass bubble protecting the seats, oval doors on each side. But the bubble's glass was filmed over except for the doors, which glittered oddly. They had a faceted look. No pilot could see out that, Nita thought, confused. And the skids, the landing skids were wrong somehow. The helicopter came sweeping over their heads low, too low. Kit! Nita yelled. She spun around and tackled him, knocking him flat as the skids made a lightning jab at the place where he had been a moment before and hit the gravel with a screech of metal. The helicopter soared on past them, refolding its skids, not yet able to slow down from the speed of its first attack. Eat your food. The thunderous rattling of its rotors mixed with another sound.
Mom.
Yeah?
Pause it.
Yeah. Sorry, excuse us. Okay. The thunderous rattling of its rotors mixed with another sound. That's loud. A high, frustrated shriek like that of a predator that has missed its kill. And almost immediately, they heard something else too. An even higher-pitched squealing, ratchety and metallic, produced by several sources and seeming to come from inside the ruined glass shelter. Kit and Nita clutched at each other, getting a better look at the helicopter from behind as it swung around for another pass. The skids were double-back limbs of metal like those of a praying mantis, cruelly clawed. Go get a pair of scissors. Under what should have been the helicopter's bubble, sharp, dark mandibles worked hungrily, and as the helicopter heeled over and came about, those faceted eyes looked at Kit and Nita with the cold, businesslike glare reserved for helpless prey. We're dead, Nita whispered. Not yet, Kit gasped, staggering up again the stairwell. Together, he and Nita ran for the stairs as the chopper creature arrowed across the rooftop at them. Nita was almost blind with terror. She knew now what had torn the door off the stairwell and doubted there was any way to keep that thing from getting them. They fell into the stairwell together. The chopper roared past again, not losing so much time in its turn this time, coming about to hover like a deadly dragonfly while positioning itself for another jab with those steel claws. Kit fell farther down the stairs than Nita did, hit his head against a wall and lay moaning. Nita slid and scrabbled to a stop, then turned to see that huge, horrible face glaring into the stairwell, sighting on her for the jab. It was unreal. None of it could possibly be real. It was all a dream, and with the inane desperation of a dreamer in a nightmare, Nita felt for the only thing at hand, the Rowan rod, and slashed at the looming face with it. She was completely unprepared for the result. A whip of silver fire, the color of the moon at full, cracked across the bubble face from the rod, which glowed in her hand. Screaming in pain and rage, the chopper creature backed up and away, but only a little. The razor-comb claws shot down at her. She slashed at them, too, and when the moonfire curled around them, the creature screamed again and pulled them back. "Kit!" she yelled, not daring to turn her back on those raging, ravenous eyes. "Kit! The antenna!" She heard him fumbling around in his pack as the hungry helicopter took another jab at her, and she whipped it again with fire. Quite suddenly, something fired past her, a bright, narrow line of blazing red light the color of metal in the forge. The molten light struck the helicopter in the underbelly, splattering in bright hot drops, and the answering scream was much more terrible this time. "It's a machine," Nita said, gasping. "Your department." "Great," Kit said, crawling up the stairs beside her. "How do you kill a helicopter?" But he braced one arm on the step just above his face, laid the antenna over it, and fired again. The chopper creature screeched again and swung away. Kit scrambled up to his feet, pressing himself flat against what
Machine?
It's a helicopter. Helicopters are machines.
Yeah, but I thought it would. But why would it have mandibles and stuff if it wasn't a creature?
It's a machine creature.
What the hell?
Pressed himself flat against
Why
what
would a
remained.
machine creature attack things? It would get nothing out of it.
This is a dark dimension, Elliot. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Pressed himself flat against what remained of the crumbling doorway, pointed the antenna again. Red fire lanced out, followed by Nita's white as she drove back into the stinging wind, and thunder of rotors, and slashed at the horror that hung and grabbed from midair. Gravel flew and stung. The wind lashed her face with her hair. The air was full of that ear-tearing metallic scream, but she kept slashing. White fire snapped and curled, and then from around the other side of the chopper creature there came a sharp crack as a bolt of Kit's hot light fired upward. The scream that followed made all the preceding ones sound faint. Nita wished she could drop the wand and cover her ears, but she didn't dare, and anyway she was too puzzled by the creature's reaction. That shot hadn't hit anywhere on its body that she could see. Still screaming, it began to spin helplessly in a circle like a toy pinwheel.
It hit the rotors.
Kit had shattered the helicopter's tail rotor. It might still be airborne, but it couldn't fly straight or steer. Nita danced back from another jab of those legs, whipped the eyes again with the silver fire of the Rowan wand as they spun past her. From the other side there was another crack and a shattering sound, and the bubblehead spinning past her again showed one faceted eye now opaque, spider-webbed with cracks. The helicopter lurched and rose, trying to gain altitude and get away. Across the roof, Kit looked up, laid the antenna across his forearm again, took careful aim, fired. This time the molten line of light struck through the blurring main rotors. With a high, anguished, ringing snap, one rotor flew off and went pinwheeling away, almost too fast to see. The helicopter gave one last wild screech, bobbled up, then sideways, as if staggering through the air. "Get down!" Kit screamed at Nita, throwing himself on the ground. She did the same, covering her head with her arms and frantically grasping the syllables of the defense shield spell. Hey, can you stop? That's really loud. The explosion took everything and sent gravel flying to bounce off the hardened air around her like hail off a car roof. Jagged blade shards snapped and rang and shot in all directions. Only when the roaring and the wash of heat that followed it died down to quiet and flickering light did Nita dare to raise her head. The helicopter creature was a broken-backed wreck with oily flame licking through it. The eye that Kit had shattered stared blindly up at the dark sky from the edge of the helipad, The tail assembly, twisted and bent, lay half under the creature's body.
We could have inspected that.
The only sounds left were the wind and that shrill keening from the little glass bubble, now much muted. Nita rid herself of the shielding spell and got slowly to her feet. "Fred?" she whispered. A pale spark floated shakily through the air to perch on her shoulder. "Here," he said, sounding as tremulous as Nita felt. "Are you well?" She nodded, walked toward the wreck. Kit stood on the other side of it, his fist clenched on the antenna. He was shaking visibly. The sight of his terror made Nita's worse as she came to stand by him. "Kit," she said, fighting the urge to cry and losing. Tears spilled out anyway. "This is not a nice place," she said. He gulped, leaking tears himself. "No," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, "it sure isn't." He looked over at the glass-walled building. "Yeah," Nita said, scrubbing at her face, "we better have a look." Slowly and carefully they approached the building, came to one collapsed wall and peered inside. Nita held her wand high so they could see by its glow. Inside, hidden amid the trash and broken glass, was what seemed to be a rude nest built of scraps of metal and wire. In the nest were 3 baby helicopters, none more than 2 feet long. They stared fiercely at Kit and Nita from tiny faceted eyes like their parents, and threatened with little jabbing forelegs, whirring with rotors too small to lift them yet. Sharing the nest with the fledglings was the partially stripped skeleton of a dog. Kit and Nita turned away together. "I think maybe we should go downstairs a little ways before we do that finding spell," Kit said, his voice still shaking. "If there's another of those things."
Destroy the babies. Destroy the baby helicopters.
They're babies!
They are evil. They are evil. Do you want another one of those things chasing you?
Yeah,
Grow up?
they headed down the stairwell to the door that in their own world had opened onto the elevator corridor. The 2 of them sat down, and Nita laid the Rowan wand in her lap so there would be light. The ceiling lights in the stairwell were out, and the place felt like the bottom of a hole. "Fred," Kit said, "how are you holding up?" Fred hung between them, his light flickering. "A little better than before. The silence is still very terrible, but at least you 2 are here." "We'll find you the sun, Fred," Nita said, wishing she was as sure as she was trying to sound. "Kit, which spell was it you were going to use?" Kit had his manual out. "At the bottom of 318, it's a double. We read together." Nita got out her own book, paged through it. "McKillop's stricture? That's for keeping grass short." No. Kit leaned over to look at Nita's manual. "Huh. How about that? Our pages are different. Look under Isodics and Diaches, the 4th one after the general introduction. Davidson's Minor Enthalpy." Nita ruffled through some more pages. Evidently, her book had more information than Kit's on the spells relating to growing things. Her suspicion about what their specialities were grew stronger. "Got it." She glanced through the spells. "Fred, you don't have to do anything, actually, but this is one of those spells that'll leave us blind to what's happening around here. Watch for us?" "Absolutely." "Okay," Kit said. "Ready? 1, 2, 3. They spoke together, slowly and carefully, matching cadence as they described the world gate and their own needs in the speech. The shadowy stairwell grew darker still, though this darkness seemed less hostile than what hung overhead, and in the deepening dimness the walls around them slowly melted away. It seemed to Nita that she and Kit and the small bright point between them hung at a great height, unsupported, over a city built of ghosts and dreams. The buildings that had looked real and solid from the roof now seemed transparent skeletons, rearing up into the gloom of this place. Stone and steel and concrete were shadows, and gazing through them down the length of the island, Nita saw again the 2 points of light that she and Kit had seen in the first spell. The closer one, perhaps 10 blocks north in the East 50s, still pulsed with its irregular, distressing light. Compelled by the spell's working, Nita looked closely at it, though that was the last thing she wanted to do. That bit of angry brightness seemed to be looking back at her. But she had no choice. She examined the light, and into her mind, poured there by the spell, came a description of the light's nature in the speech. She would have backed away as she had from the Peritons, except that again there was nowhere to go. A catalog of sorts, that light was. A listing. A set of descriptions. But all wrong. All twisted, angry as the light looked. Hungry as the helicopter creature had been. Hating as the surrounding darkness was. Full of the horrors that everything in existence could become. The book, which is not named. Nita struggled. Though unable to move or cry out, her mind beat at the spell like a bird in a cage, and finally the spell released her, but only to look in the other direction, downtown toward the Wall Street end of the island. There, in the illogical-looking tangle of streets built before the regular gridwork of Manhattan was laid down, buried amid the ghosts of buildings, another light throbbed, regular, powerful, unafraid. It flared. It dazzled with white silver fire, and Nita thought of the moonlight radiance of the Rowan wand. In a way, the spell said this second light was the source of the wand's power, even though here and now the source was bound and limited. This time, the syllables of the speech were no crushing weight of horror. They were a song, one Nita wished would never stop. Courage, merriment, an invitation to everything existence to be what it was, be the best it could be, grow, live. Description, affirmation, encouragement, all embodied in one place, one source, buried in the shadows. The Book of Night with Moon. A feeling of urgency came over Nita, and the spell told her that without the protection of the Bright Book, she and Kit and Fred would never survive the hungry malevolence of this place long enough to find the World Gate and escape. Nor, for that matter, would they be able to find the World Gate at all. It was being held against them by powers adept in wizardries more potent than anything the two of them could manage. It would be folly to try matching wizardries with the lone power on its own ground, this outworld long given over to its rule. Their best chance was to find the Bright Book and free it of the constraint that held its power helpless. Then there might be a chance. The spell shut itself off, finished. Walls and physical darkness curled around them again. Kit and Nita looked at each other, uncertain. "We've been had," Kit said. Nita shook her head, not following him. "Remember Tom saying it was odd..." Do you want to braid my hair? Mm-hmm. Do you remember Tom saying it was odd that our first spell turned up Fred and the news that the Bright Book was missing? And what Pichu said then? "There are no accidents," Nita murmured. "Uh-huh. How likely do you think it is that all this is an accident? Something wanted us here, I bet," Kit scowled. "They might have asked us. It's not fair." Nita held still for a moment, considering this. "Well, maybe they did ask us." "Huh? Not me. The oath." Kit got quiet quickly. "Well," he admitted after a while, "it did have all kinds of warnings in front of it, and I went ahead and read it anyway." "So did I." Nita closed her eyes for a second, breathing out, and heard something in the back of her head, a thread of memory. "Did I do right? Go find out." "Look," she said, opening her eyes again, "maybe we're not as bad off as we think. Tom did say that younger wizards have more power. We don't have a lot of supplies, but we're both pretty good with this speech by now, and Fred is here to help. We're armed." She glanced down at the Rowan wand, still lying moonbright in her lap. "For how long?" Kit said. He sighed too. "Then again, I guess it doesn't matter much. If we're going to find the Bright Book, the only way to do it is to hurry. Somebody knows we're here. That thing showed up awful fast." He nodded at the roof. "Yeah." Nita got up, took a moment to stretch, then glanced down at Kit. He wasn't moving. "What's the matter?" Kit stared at the antenna in his hands. "When I was talking to the Edsel," he said, "it told me some things about the powers that didn't want intelligence to happen in machines. They knew that people would start talking to them, make friends with them." Stop, it's making noise. Everybody would be happier as a result. Those powers..." He looked up. "If I understood that spell right, the one running this place is the chief of them all, the worst of them. The destroyer, the engenderer of rust." "Kit!" "I know, you shouldn't name it." He got up, held out a hand to Fred, who bobbled over to Kit and came to rest on his palm. "But that's who we're up against." "Or what?" "Fred, do you know what we're talking about?" Fred's thought was frightened but steady. "The star snuffer," he said. "The one who saw light come to be and could not make it in turn, and so rebelled against it and declared a war of darkness. Though the rebellion didn't work as well as it might have, for darkness only made the light seem brighter." Kit nodded. "That's the one. If we do get the bright book, that's who'll come after us." Fred shuddered. A flicker of light, so like a spark about to go out in the wind that Kit hurriedly tucked the antenna under his arm and cupped his other hand around Fred protectively. "Please stop." "I've lost enough friends to that one," Fred said. "Heard enough songs stilled." Hold on. "I've lost enough friends to that one," Fred said. "Heard enough songs stilled. People gone nova before their time, or fallen through naked singularities into places where you burn forever but don't learn anything from it." For a moment neither of them could follow Fred's thought. Though he was using the speech as always, they couldn't follow what other things he was describing, only that they were as terrible to him as a warped thing like the helicopter creature was to them. "No matter," he said at last. "You, too, are part of the answer to stopping that kind of thing. Otherwise my search for an advisory nexus wouldn't have brought me to you. Let's do what we can." Kit nodded. "Whatever that is. I wish I knew where to begin." Nita leaned back against the wall. "Didn't Tom say something about the two books being tied together, so that you could use one to guide you to the other?" "Yeah. Well, we're not too far from the dark one," Nita swallowed, "if we could get hold of that and use it to lead us to the bright one. That vision only gave a general idea of where the Book of Night with Moon was, probably because of it being restrained or guarded or whatever." Kit looked at Nita as if she'd taken leave of her senses. "Steal the dark book? Sure! And then we have—" He waved his hand at the northward wall, not wanting to say any name. "And Lord knows what else come chasing after us." "Why not?" Nita retorted. "It's a better chance than going straight for the bright one, which we know is guarded somehow. We'd go fumbling around down there in the financial district and probably get caught right away. But why would they guard the dark book? They're the only ones who would want it. I bet you we could get at the dark one a lot more easily than the other." Kit chewed his lip briefly. "Well," Nita said, "what do you think?" "I think you're probably nuts, but we can't just sit here, and it wouldn't hurt to see what the situation is. Fred?" "Lead," Fred said. "I'll follow." Kit gently tossed Fred back into the air and paused long enough to put his book away. He didn't put the antenna away, though. The Rowan wand glowed steadily and brilliantly. "Can't you damp that down a little?" Kit said. "If somebody sees us—" "No, I can't. I tried." Nita cast about for ways to hide it, finally settled on sticking it back in her back jean pocket and settling her down vest over it. "Better?" "Yeah." Kit had turned his attention to the doorknob. He touched it, spoke softly to it in the speech, turned it. Nothing happened. "Not listening?" he wondered out loud and bent to touch the keyhole. "Now why—" "Ow!" He jumped back, almost knocking Nita over. "What's the matter?" Kit was sucking on his finger, looking pained. "Bit me," he said, removing the finger to examine it. It bled. "I get the feeling," Nita said slowly, "that there's not much here that's friendly." "Yeah," Kit looked glumly at the doorknob. "I guess we better consider everything we see potentially dangerous." He lifted the antenna, bent down by the lock again, and touched the keyhole delicately with the knob at the end.